Okay, so welcome back everybody to today's webinar here at BINA. If you're reading news, you would see that the world is literally shaking. There's a lot happening in the world. People are scared, people are fearful of war, of terrible regimes attacking, etc. What I want to discuss today is another fear, which is probably almost as bad, if not in a way worse, and that is the decline of moral values in today's society, or any values for that matter. So we have discussed in the past, in these webinars, the concept that without a value system given by God, then society could fall apart eventually. Today I want to bring a number of examples, some scary examples that probably might shock you, should shock you, and we'll get into them a little bit, and we'll try to show that we need to stay strong to a value system of absolute morality in order to make sure that society keeps on being a peaceful and loving and safe place. Now, before we do that, I just want to clarify two very important clarifications that we've done in the past, just very important to say it every time. First of all, this does not mean that somebody who doesn't believe in God is a bad person. Not at all. You could be a very good person. It just means that it's not absolute, meaning that it could be that it's your opinion that you have to act a certain way. So it's your opinion that you need to be a good person and that you shouldn't kill and you shouldn't steal, etc., etc. But who's to decide that that is 100% that way? Who's to decide that that is true? Because if there is no God, there is no real truth. It's just everybody can live the way they understand is the right way to live. Now, thank God, most people understand and have come to the conclusion that the right way to live is to be civilized. But not necessarily will it always be that way. Take God out of the equation and it's not absolute anymore, and we're just following our own opinions. Who knows where our intellect can lead us, as we will see in a number of minutes. Number two, obviously, this is just a discussion about what's right and what's wrong. This is not a discussion about judging people or not tolerating people or hating people. That is not relevant to our discussion. Whether someone does something right or wrong, we need to have some level of acceptance for them and care for them as another human being, even if they're doing something wrong. That's okay. But what's relevant to our discussion today is what is right and what is wrong, not judging somebody who does something wrong. That's not at all what we need to love everybody and care for everybody and treat everybody with respect. The point over here is there a definition of what's right and what's wrong? So the first example I want to bring is from an article that I read today. These are all printed online. You can look them up yourself. This is an article from The Guardian, which quotes which has an article over here from the Damien Carrington Environment editor that says as follows, and I quote: "The greatest impact individuals can have in fighting climate change is to have one fewer child, according to a new study that identifies the most effective ways people can cut their carbon emissions." And it goes on to say that the next best way is to get rid of your car, avoid going on planes, eating a vegetarian diet, etc., etc. But however, the highest impact actions are rarely mentioned in government advice and school textbooks, and therefore having less children will have a better impact when it comes to climate change. Now, without getting involved in the climate change debate, and it's not really relevant to our discussion, whether it is true or it's not true, let's even say, for the sake of this, that it is true. This is not, that is not the point. To even think of advocating that people should have one less child for the sake of climate change, I mean, having children in Torah is a value, is a mitzvah. In our culture, having children is a special thing and a unique thing, and every child is precious. Every additional child we call a simcha, is a joyous occasion. We celebrate it. Children are not a nuisance, not to their parents and not to society and not to the environment. Children is everything. Children, having a child is the greatest thing that can happen to a person in their life in our value system. Move away from that value system, we may come to the conclusion, and obviously this is only an opinion of somebody, I'm not saying most people agree with it, most people probably don't agree with it. But you can come up with such an opinion that in order to save the environment, we should stop having as many children. I just find that absolutely absurd. Now, that was more of a mild example relative to the next example that I'm going to bring. And this example, to be honest, I actually would rather even not mention. It's so hurtful and so painful. But I think there is a point in mentioning it because we need to realize that the more God is taken away from society, such things can happen. This is an article printed in the Telegraph. Again, you can find it online. And it's quoting an article, I should say, published in the Journal of Medical Ethics. And I'm going to read what this website says. Some of it is a quote from this article, which was published in the Journal of Medical Ethics. But before I read this, I want to just go back in history for a second. More than 2,000 years ago, at the time when the Greeks were the world empire, they ruled the world. And they had a very strong culture. We all know that Greek culture is an important word. And part of their culture, or I should say the focus of their culture, was the human body. They worshipped the human body, including the human intellect, the human mind. There was nothing higher than the human mind. If my intellect led me a certain way, that needed to be followed, even if it's cold and even if it's cruel. That is the highest level. That is what dictates the way I run my life. I want to quote you a quote from Aristotle, a great Greek thinker, who writes like this: part of the Greek culture was actually to kill babies, especially disabled ones. And I want to just read you a quote from Aristotle. He says, "There must be a law that no imperfect or maimed child shall be brought up. And to avoid an excess in population, some children must be exposed. For a limit must be fixed to the population of the state." That is a quote from Aristotle. Now, he was using his mind. Intellect is nothing if you do not have a moral premise. If you don't have a moral premise, even such a ridiculous notion that the way to protect society and the way to ensure that society should continue, you need to kill children. How can someone even think up such a thing? Such a cold and cruel calculation can only come when the premise is your mind. It doesn't have to come. Just because someone uses their mind doesn't mean you're going to come to that, but it is possible to come to that. And lest you think that is only more than 2,000 years ago, I want to quote again from this article, which is published in the Journal of Medical Ethics. And it says as follows. It says over there that newborn babies are not, quote unquote, actual persons and do not have a, quote again, moral right to life. The academics also argue that parents should be able to have their babies killed if it turns out to be disabled when it is born. I mean, again, it actually is painful for me to read this because it's so ridiculous. And it goes on to say that there's absolutely no difference between aborting a fetus and killing a baby after it's born. And I'll quote, he says like this: "We take person to mean an individual who is capable of attributing to her own existence some basic value such that being deprived of this existence represents a loss to her. Therefore," they argue, not possible to damage a newborn by preventing her from developing the potential to become a person in the morally relevant sense. And the truth is, it goes on to continue and say something so horrific that I'm actually not going to quote it. But what I found even more horrific than this is a quote from the journal's editor. In fact, actually, I can't pronounce her name, Professor Julian somebody, director of the Oxford Center for Practical Ethics. She says that the article's author had received death threats since publishing the article. And obviously, that's the wrong thing to do. We shouldn't be threatening anybody. But he said those who made abusive and threatening posts about the study were fanatics opposed to the very value of a liberal society. So hold on a second. So the ones who went crazy about such a notion, such an idea that you should be able to take the life of a baby because there's no moral problem, because they're not valuable yet and only potential, they're opposed to the very value of a liberal society? This is absolutely crazy and totally nuts. But the point over here is that who says they're wrong? Now, obviously, I don't agree with that. Obviously, I find it absolutely crazy. But using your mind, that's one opinion, and I have a different opinion. Who's to decide who's wrong and who's right? And the answer is, and the only answer is, that the only way to actually say in an absolute way, we can say that I find it disgusting, you can say that I disagree with it, you can say it's absolutely morally wrong, but the only way to actually say that with 100% conviction that it is wrong is if there is absolute morality. If there's a morality which is absolute, not based on what I understand, rather the way the creator of the world, God himself, has decided how his world shall run. Only God can decide who should be born. Only God can decide whose life can be taken away. Nobody else, no human being, no matter how smart you are, no matter how intellectual you are, can have such an opinion about such a matter, because leave it up to the human mind. Again, obviously, the people which hold this opinion are a minority of a minority. But the fact is that you see that your mind can even lead you, academics can even lead you to such a direction, is absolutely crazy, and it should scare us. And the only way to actually make sure that that doesn't happen, and that, God forbid, such a notion should become more widespread, is to ensure that we put God as a part of our life, as our moral compass, that he decides what is right and what is wrong, and not us. Us human beings should stay out of the business of what's right or what's wrong, and leave it up to God to decide what's right and what's wrong. I will bring one more example, and this is an example about incest. Now, any normal person knows that incest is wrong. We don't even need to explain it. It's just wrong. The family unit is, of course, in Judaism and Torah, it's forbidden to have any intimate relationships with one's immediate relatives, brothers, sisters, parents, obviously. And it's obvious. Torah has a huge emphasis on the family, a huge emphasis on the holiness of the family. And part of that, of preserving the holiness of the family, is that there is no intimate relationships between immediate family. However, not so much anymore. I have watched a video on YouTube, you can search it yourself, of a guy walking around with a video camera to random people on the street. This doesn't look staged. I can't say that 100%, but it definitely doesn't look staged. And it's walking up to random people and asking them, what would you say if your friend married his sister? Would that bother you? And each one of these people would not answer. They said, well, I wouldn't do it, obviously, because, they're normal, but I'm not going to judge. I cannot say that it is wrong. Point being that there is no right or wrong. It's just my opinion. My opinion is that it's wrong, but who am I to say that it is right or it is wrong? It's up to everybody to decide that. The bottom line is, if we leave the decision of what's right and what's wrong up to us to decide, society will, and hopefully this will never happen, but it can fall apart. The moral values that we know today and we accept as normal may not be so normal, and you may be accused, quote back from that article, as a fanatic opposed to the very values of a liberal society. In order to take care of that, we need to make sure that we have a sense of absolute morality coming from the one true God who decides what is right and what is wrong. Have a wonderful day.